My wife, the perfect woman to a nauseating degree, decided that torching our house was the ticket to a new life. Yes, you heard me right. And while she was playing the hostess of the year at her birthday bash, I was ready to make a move that would change everything. Trust me, things are about to heat up. Hi, my name is Mark and I'm 28. From the outside, my life probably looked like your typical American dream. You know what I mean. The house with the white picket fence, a job that didn't break my back, and of course, a wife who fit all the cliches. Jessica, the perfect, caring, always smiling, toothpaste commercial kind of wife. Yeah, 5 years of marriage went pretty smoothly, or so I thought. We had that house in the suburbs, one of those neighborhoods where everyone is so nice it makes you sick. Neighbors wave, kids ride bikes, and it's like everyone's in a silent competition for the greenest lawn. You look at it all and think, this is it, I've made it. And with Jess, well, it seemed like everything was fine. She always looked like $1,000,000, like she'd just stepped out of a salon. She was the perfect wife that people envied. But here's the thing. Sometimes behind that perfect picture, something strange is lurking. It's like in a movie where everything seems harmless until, suddenly, a guy with a chainsaw shows up. That's how it felt with Jess. I just couldn't put my finger on what was off. She was always so put together, if you know what I mean. So perfect that it made you wonder, is she a robot or an alien? But I didn't really give it much thought back then. You know how it goes. You've got work, hang out with friends in the evenings, and your wife, well, she's just there, and you kind of take it for granted. Then, little things started happening. At first, nothing major. She became more distant, like she was hiding something. At first, I thought it was just stress. Work, the grind. It's the kind of thing everyone goes through. But then, it started to really get under my skin. Thoughts like, wait, why is she acting so weird? Why is she suddenly talking about money and home insurance all the time? And then things got even weirder. Jess became obsessed with finances, constantly talking about how we should be living better, how we could afford more. Have you ever heard the phrase, the brighter it shines, the deeper the darkness? Well, that's exactly how it felt. She'd look at me when she talked about money, and there was this gleam in her eyes that gave me chills. That's when the real suspicion started. Dude, I tried to come up with logical explanations, like maybe it's a midlife crisis, or just a phase. Women go through stuff like that, right? But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was looking at some perfect version of Jess, while the real her was buried deep under a mask. I ignored it for a long time, but when something starts bugging you that much, no matter how hard you try to look away, reality catches up with you. You know how people say there's always that one moment in every marriage when something goes terribly wrong? Well, one evening, when I came home earlier than usual, that moment hit me. I walk up to the house, and what do I see? Jessica in the garage. And not just a casual visit. She's really digging through our old boxes, the ones I thought should have been covered in a thick layer of dust by now. Okay, I thought, maybe she's cleaning up. She's done it before. But something about how she was moving started to bug me. She was sifting through our old stuff, pulling out a few boxes, and carefully, almost like they were filled with diamonds, carrying them to the car and loading them into the trunk. That's when things started to look suspicious, I'm not the type to jump to conspiracy theories, but this made the back of my neck itch. My brain tried to explain it away. Maybe she's donating things to charity. Maybe she's planning to sell old stuff at a garage sale. It all made sense, but that nagging feeling stuck with me, and it only got worse. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about that weird evening. Jess kept acting normal, but something inside me was screaming, dude, something's definitely wrong here. That's when I decided to play it safe. I'm not usually paranoid, but, sometimes your gut is practically shouting at you. So, I set up cameras around the house. Yeah, like a spy. And look, this isn't something you usually do in a happy marriage. But I just couldn't shake that weird feeling. Jess started going out more and more in the evenings. Sometimes it was girls' night out, other times it was supposedly the gym. But come on, she's not a gym person. and she's definitely not the social butterfly type. We never used to have this many social events. And now, when she looked at me, it was like there was something cold behind her eyes, like she was hiding something. There was this invisible wall between us, and I couldn't figure out what she was building behind it. Then, one night when she went out for another girls' night, I decided to check the camera footage. At that moment, I wasn't expecting anything earth-shattering. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining things, but what I found completely flipped my reality upside down. Okay, by this point I had this creeping feeling that my life was turning into some kind of weird thriller. But when I started watching the footage, that feeling quickly escalated to, "What the hell is going on?" There was Jess, slowly walking around the house, inspecting corners like she was planning some damn puzzle. Dude, she was pacing every corner like she was figuring out the perfect spots for something. But what? It was getting creepy. Phone in hand, she was constantly texting, staring at the screen, clearly discussing something with someone. I kept thinking, who the hell are you texting so much? You've always hated talking on the phone. Then she went up to the attic. Wait, the attic? Okay, hold on. I wasn't even sure we'd ever been up there since we bought the house. But there she was, spending a long time up there. I could have chalked it up to looking for old Christmas decorations or photo albums, but something told me that wasn't the case. It all just felt off. But the craziest part came when I noticed her rummaging through our financial documents, and that's when I started to really freak out. She was looking through the insurance papers. What? Jessica, who normally couldn't care less about this stuff, was suddenly deeply interested in insurance. It's like if I suddenly got into knitting. It made no sense. So the question was, why? I couldn't stand it any longer. The feeling of being played was too much, so I decided to dig a little deeper. Maybe it wasn't the most ethical move, but man, I checked her phone. Yeah, just grabbed it and looked at her messages. And what I found hit me like a bucket of ice-cold water. It turns out Jess had been messaging an insurance agent. And not just messaging. She was clearly discussing how to get a huge payout. And then things got even crazier. They were talking about a fire. Dude, a fire! Seriously? At that moment, it felt like I was in some sort of bad prank. I sat there staring at the screen, unable to believe what I was reading. My wife, the woman I'd been with for 5 years, was actually discussing the possibility of burning our house down. This wasn't just a hit to the head. This was like a meteorite crashing into my reality. So, one evening, Jess went out again for one of her girls' nights. Yeah, sure, girls. These nights out were happening so frequently that I was starting to have questions. And no, I wasn't jealous. I was more concerned about what kind of nonsense she was up to behind my back. Anyway, as soon as she left the house, I decided to check the camera footage again. And this time, things were more serious than ever. In the footage, Jess wasn't just wandering around the house like usual, looking at walls or counting corners. No, she was methodically inspecting the rooms, almost like she was checking something. Her movements became more deliberate, like she was planning every step. Listen, when your wife starts acting like a secret agent in a spy movie, that's definitely a red flag. Every time I rewatched the footage, my suspicions kept building into an unsettling picture. Something was brewing, and I definitely wasn't going to be the last to know about it. Then, closer to midnight, Jess came back home. Seemed like an ordinary evening, right? Wrong. I lay in bed pretending to be asleep under the covers. You know how it is in movies when the main character fakes being asleep but is ready to react at any moment? That was me. I was even breathing slowly, so she wouldn't suspect anything. And then I hear her sneaking down the hallway, talking quietly on the phone. Man, she was definitely nervous. You could tell immediately. I caught bits and pieces of the conversation. Everything's ready. The date is set. No later than next week. My heart started racing. What plan? What date? And most importantly, what the hell was going on? It sounded like some kind of cryptic code I needed to crack, but there was no time for puzzles. I knew one thing. She was up to something, and it definitely wasn't a movie night. The next morning, I decided it was time to finally connect the dots. There was no point pretending any longer. I went to the garage, hoping to find some sort of clue. And what did I find? Gas cans. Not one, not two. There were several, neatly hidden behind old boxes of our junk. Okay, that was way beyond normal. Listen, if your wife is stashing gas cans in the garage, you should seriously start questioning her plans for the upcoming weekend. At that moment, everything became clear. Not completely, but the pieces were starting to fall into place. Jess was planning to set the house on fire. Yeah, man, it sounds like the plot of a crime drama. But this was my reality, and I had some time left before she decided to throw a barbecue out of our home. Okay, I couldn't live like this anymore. I already felt like the lead in some cheap detective show, minus the cool background soundtrack. Staying in a house with someone who could throw a hot party in the living room at any moment. Yeah, that's a bit much, even for me. Staying silent wasn't just dumb. It was low-key self-destruction. I'd had enough. It was time to handle this circus. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, making breakfast. She stood there like nothing was wrong, pouring coffee and making toast as if she wasn't planning to burn everything to the ground. Yeah, a picture-perfect family scene. Except now, all I could see behind it was Jess with gasoline and a match in her hands. A great time for a heart-to-heart, right? Jess, what are you planning to do with the house? The question slipped out before I could think about how it would sound. She froze. Her face went pale so fast that I thought, okay, she's either going to cry or pass out right here. But as it turned out, Jess wasn't one to faint. Instead, she slowly looked up at me and, with the most innocent expression, said, "You're losing it, Mark. What are you even talking about? This is all a misunderstanding." Yeah, sure, a misunderstanding. Like, oh, those gasoline cans aren't mine. I just thought it was the new home fragrance. Man, her voice was shaking, and I couldn't figure out how she thought she could fool me after everything I'd seen. But the funniest part? She kept playing the happy housewife role, like everything could still be swept under the rug. The problem was, her act had already flopped a long time ago. I waited while she kept making excuses, and then I just said, "Jess, I saw the footage. I know what you're planning." And here's where things get interesting. Her face twisted into a mix of horror and anger. She stopped trying to smile or deny it. At that moment, the mask finally came off. We stood there in silence, staring at each other. It felt like the whole perfect house was about to collapse from the tension hanging in the air. And you know what she did? Instead of confessing or even trying to explain, she just silently turned and walked out of the kitchen. That's when I realized she wasn't going to give up so easily. This was just the beginning. I watched her leave, thinking, all right, the game's on, but now I know all your cards. That night, I knew it was time to act. Staying in this house with gasoline in the garage and my wife's clearly unhinged plans was pure suicide. Forget family values. I chose life. So, as soon as Jess left for another girls' night out, yeah, right, I grabbed the USB with the footage and headed straight to the police. Yeah, man, I became that guy who rats out his wife to the cops. But listen, when your house and life are on the line, you do the same. I showed up at the station, walked up to the desk, and immediately got the feeling they weren't exactly expecting me. A couple of lazy cops glanced at me, but when I started talking about gasoline cans and showed them the footage, everything changed fast. They got it right away. I guess it's not every day a guy walks in with videos of his wife planning to burn down the house. Interesting morning for them, right? The cops took it seriously. No jokes or sarcasm. They must have picked up on the fact that this wasn't just some family spat, but real criminal stuff. And you know what calmed me the most? They agreed to put Jess under surveillance. Not arrest her yet, but watch her. That was something. They knew that if she had gasoline, the plan was probably about to go into action. They decided not to make any big moves yet, waiting to gather more evidence. Fair enough, but at that moment, I needed some kind of action. I couldn't just sit around waiting for Jess to throw her fireworks show with our house. The next few days were insanely tense. Jess kept up with her usual routines, but there was a nervousness about her. Everything seemed normal. She went shopping, chatted on the phone, but you could tell something was eating at her. Maybe she sensed that I was onto her? Or maybe she was having second thoughts about her plan. Either way, it was clear. She was preparing for something big. I watched her from a distance, pretending everything was normal. But inside, I was boiling. It felt like the calm before the storm, when you know something's coming, but you can't pinpoint exactly when. I felt that her plan was about to hit its climax. Jessica's birthday was approaching so fast it felt like a storm of pretentiousness was about to hit us. She planned the day like it was going to be her coronation. You should have seen how she prepared. Guest list, buffet, the trendiest dress of the year, everything to make it look like something out of a glossy magazine. At that moment, she was sure she had the world in the palm of her hand. Yeah, if the world was made up of gasoline cans and fake smiles. Of course, she had no idea that her party would be the beginning of the end. The day came, and the house was packed with guests. Everything was going according to her plan. Friends, family, all the people who'd spent years praising her as the perfect wife and model citizen. And there I was, standing off to the side, ready to make my move. Yeah, I was that backstabbing husband about to drop a bombshell right in the middle of her party. But don't rush to judge me. Justice sometimes requires a little theatrics. When everyone had gathered around the table, chatting about nonsense and praising Jess for her organizing skills, I stood up and tapped my glass with a spoon. I have something I'd like to show you in honor of this special occasion. The room went silent, and all eyes turned to me. You should have seen their faces when I said that. They were fully engaged, like at the premiere of a blockbuster. Even Jess, sitting across from me, looked at me, but not with the same confidence as before. There was a flicker of worry in her eyes. I plugged the USB into the laptop connected to the projector and hit play. And well, let's just say the effect was huge. On the screen, clear as day, Jessica, walking around the house with gasoline cans, inspecting every corner, planning her little fire show. For a few seconds, everyone just froze. The silence was so thick you could hear a pin drop. And then, shock. Complete, utter shock. Someone gasped, someone dropped a glass, and the whole room fell into a state of panic. Jess sat there in her chair, as white as a sheet, unable to say a word. Her perfectly planned birthday had turned into a real-life horror show. You should have seen her face change every second. First fear, then anger, and finally, complete confusion. She looked like someone who just realized their life was crashing down, and no fancy dress or group of friends could fix it. I stood there watching the drama unfold, just waiting. And a few minutes later, the police burst into the house. It was a scene straight out of a movie. Guests in shock, Jessica in total disbelief, and the cops, the heroes of the night. They walked over to her, cuffed her, and led her out of the house right in front of everyone. And just like that, her perfect birthday became the day of her downfall. So, after Jess was led out of the house under the confused stares of her friends, family, and neighbors, life moved at a crazy pace. At first I thought, maybe this is all a dream and I'll wake up soon. But nope, this was real. Her arrest wasn't just a bolt from the blue, it was that meteor strike that wipes out an entire continent. Her trial didn't take long. What was there to investigate? Gasoline cans, camera footage of her practically rehearsing how to torch the place? It was all against her. She was charged with attempted arson for insurance fraud. Simple and straightforward. In one instant, her perfect life collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. And you know what was most interesting? All her friends, the same ones who used to gush over her perfect dinners, fashionable clothes, and successful career, ditched her the moment things got hot. Literally. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who tried to burn down her house for a payout. It was like, sorry, we don't hang out with psychos. That seemed like the hardest blow for her. All those years she'd spent building a life based on appearances fell apart in a single day. That's what happens when you stake everything on a facade. And me? Well, the house was saved. The cops, insurance agents, everyone congratulated me for figuring things out in time. Cool, I guess, but it felt like a hollow victory. I knew that my marriage, whatever was left of it, was dead. All those years we'd lived in an illusion, and suddenly, that illusion popped like a soap bubble. Jess wasn't who I thought she was, and I had no idea who she really was. But one thing was clear. Greed, cold betrayal, and a thirst for easy money had lived inside her for a long time, and I'd been too blind to see it. After her arrest, I couldn't stay in this town. The house I loved had become a reminder of how everything went wrong. So I did what any sane person would do. Packed my things and got the hell out. Starting over from scratch. Sometimes it's the only option when everything around you crumbles. Sometimes I think back to that day. I wonder if I could have stopped it earlier. Could I have prevented the disaster? But honestly, I realized this was one of those situations where there was no choice. Jessica had chosen her path long ago, and I just hadn't seen it. We all wear rose-colored glasses sometimes, but when they come off, reality hits you like a sledgehammer. So yeah, life goes on. But one thing I've learned, no matter how hard you try to make everything perfect, sometimes that very perfection is what destroys you from the inside.